Welcome, everybody, to the Spiral Marketing Show. We have a great episode for you today with a guest I will introduce momentarily to you. He is making his second appearance on the show. And this topic is very interesting in that it's been pervasive in various industries to be agile. And that can mean a number of different things to different people, different organizations, different verticals. So we'll get into that. And I think that after this episode, you will come away with better ways to be more nimble and agile within your organization, within your work, and maybe beyond. So enjoy. All right. So Greg Kihlstrom, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So Greg, I've known a long time, a great guy, and he's done a lot of great work for the industry. He is an author. He's an executive at the Yes And agency, and his bio is outstanding. He's been a president for various parts of the American Advertising Federation, formerly the DC Ad Club, locally and regionally. So I'll let you add color to that. But on top of that, he has written a few books and a series that has to do with Agile. We are going to be talking about the Agile Brand today, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Any other details that you think are kind of important for context in terms of your background and bio?
Sure. So I started a digital agency called Carousel 30 now probably about 15 years ago that got acquired by Yes And last year. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So I come from the agency world. So, a kind of a combination of creative marketing and technology, and that has certainly fed into, the ideas in the book of, being agile from a number of different perspectives. And certainly there's some aspects of branding in there, some aspects of marketing, advertising, all of those types of things. In addition to my role at the agency, I'm also chair of the National Innovation Committee for the American Advertising Federation. So it's a new committee by that organization, and it's a national committee. So really working to teach, innovative approaches, principles, technologies, all of those things to the national membership of the AAF. Outstanding.
And why Agile and why now?
Sure. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk about Agile just in general. It could be everything from, Agile has its roots in manufacturing and software. So certainly, people in those practices have been doing it for years. But more recently, Agile marketing has really, taken off. And I think a lot of marketers have been practicing it, even though they haven't been calling it by that name. Simply the idea of being iterative, continually optimizing, and things like better access to data, better access to real-time information data, all of those types of things make stuff like that easier. I think even more recently, Agile has kind of made its way into business and business organization, HR, all of those types of areas where companies understand and are starting to realize that in order to survive, they need to be able to survive disruption. So, everything from the obvious disruption that happens in industries like banking or, the taxi industry by Uber and, things like that. But even on a much smaller scale of disruption with employees wanting to work from home or having more flexible, teleworking and all of that. So, really just companies needing to understand that, being agile is not, again, just a software thing that the IT team needs to understand. It's really everywhere throughout the organization it comes into play. And so my most recent book, The Agile Brand, talks about that in terms of branding. And so, a lot of people that have been doing branding for a long time, it's a little bit of a weird juxtaposition because, some of branding is, your values shouldn't change overnight and, they shouldn't be subject to, to changes in market and all of those things. You should always stay true to your values. But there are a lot of things about markets, audiences, all of those things that should shift and should be, should iterate over time. just as markets change and things. So that's where I'm going with that. And it's been interesting to hear some great feedback, some great questions, some great counterpoints, even from people that just are either they know the Agile principles very well, or perhaps they're it's relatively new to them, and having some nice challenging questions and things like that.
Love it.
Yeah.
I also really liked that phrase, to survive disruption.
Yeah,
That's a very compelling value proposition.
Thanks. Yeah. It's and like I said, it's not just the big well-known industries that are facing this. It's really everyone everywhere is, if they haven't experienced disruption yet, they will.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, not to borrow from other people's interviews in order to hack mine, but what I'm curious, legitimately, from the differing perspectives, what have been some of the interesting questions that you've got, like maybe from some of the more techie folks, some of the more basic, unrelated genres?
Yeah, I think from the technical folks, it's one question that comes up often is, when we're talking about agile branding, are we actually talking about having scrum masters, like you were saying earlier?
Right? Are
we actually, is the branding team going to have a scrum master, and are we doing everything according to strict agile methodology? Because there, for software, for manufacturing, there is a very strict set of terms. There's a couple different approaches, but my definition of it for branding is not so strict along those guidelines. It's more a philosophy, and it's a way of thinking. And when you can apply things that have been tried and true and tested in other fields like software or manufacturing, sure, like go ahead and do that. But it's really more about being adaptive, about and also being methodical about, it's great that we have access to all this data and real-time stuff, but the danger is to be overly reactive to it without thinking about it. So it's on the one hand it's being nimble. On the other hand, it's actually waiting a little bit, being methodical about, okay, we're gonna wait for 3 weeks to listen to what's happening, and then we're going to make a recommendation. So I think the nice part about it's a compromise between, okay, we're going to make a marketing plan and let it run for 12 months and then see how it goes, which is not exactly how it was done for decades, but kind of how it was done for decades. And now it's, okay, we're going to adjust in smaller increments, but we're not just going to adjust overnight because things didn't work well for the last 24 hours. We're going to be methodical and thoughtful about when, how, and why we're going to change things.
Love it. That makes perfect sense. And thank you for bringing up the more technical question that I'd asked during the pre-show. That's kind of fun. We should probably pull back just a little bit and give some definitions for those who have maybe heard the term agile but don't really know what that means. Can you give kind of the standard definition in a sentence or two, and then maybe how you think of it in context?
Yeah. So I think one way to look at it is to compare it to the alternative. So, and to go back to software development days. So there was this, or there still is a methodology called the software development lifecycle. So what that is commonly referred to as a waterfall process, which means there are a series of steps. In order to get to one step, you have to finish the last step. So, it's a fairly rigid process of, you go from one stage to the next. If you need to change something, massively once you get halfway through the project, though, it will require you to go in some sense back all the way from the start to finish again. So in other words, if you're building a website, for instance, and you go through a planning phase, a design phase, and a build phase. If you get to the build phase and all of a sudden you realize you kind of screwed up with the planning phase, you can't just make some minor changes. A lot of times you actually have to go back and plan because your original plan was messed up from the beginning, in other words. So
right.
It's this whole idea of things are so rigid and regimented that in a lot of cases that makes a lot of sense. When you're building rockets and doing very complex tasks with teams around the world and and there is no room for error whatsoever, it makes a lot of sense to do things in this way. And there's a lot of things that are still built this way. But in a world where there are constant changes, where software plays a big role in things which can be updated easily, when access to information, is more real time, when markets can change almost overnight,
right,
you need to have a more nimble process of. Which is the agile process, which would be, let's start small. Let's focus on quick wins, low hanging fruit, all of those types of things. Let's build something which, a minimum viable product, basically. Let's get that out into the market and let's see what happens.
Sure.
And I think that, that certainly applies in the software world, but it applies in marketing. Get something out in market, see how consumers react to it, and then modify it over time. And what I've been, as I've been researching, and I'm working on the follow-up to the Agile Brand, which is called the Agile Consumer, which is
Nice.
really thinking about everything not from the brand perspective, but from the consumer's perspective. And the average consumer is getting more and more okay with being part of a development process. So in other words, when they're part of the development of a product, when they're able to give feedback or even crowdfunding things or all of that, they're so bought into the process that this whole idea of months and years of planning a product rollout to be just perfect becomes less critical than getting consumer buy-in from the first, in the first place. So it's really this shift in a lot of things, but it's a shift in really mentality of, let's get something, it has to work, it has to be good, all of that. Don't just throw stuff out there that is crap or whatever. But it's less important to have the final version of the product, the ideal product, than it is to have something that people are willing to try and give feedback on, and so on and so forth.
Sure. That's great. That's helpful. It's similar to the lean startup method, right?
Yeah.
And it's a circle, the process where you would have a plan, you research, you build, you test, and then you just continue to iterate through.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well, that's helpful. In terms of who we're speaking to most clearly, how do you see that let's start with the Agile Brand.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of wonderful books about branding, and I wasn't trying to write a book about branding because I think, I've kind of gotten into this whole industry in a sort of weird sideways way, I feel like. But so I don't claim to be
because you started as a designer.
I started
that 15 years ago,
yeah,
or whenever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as a designer, I worked for a tech startup, back in the early 2000s. Learned a lot about marketing and digital marketing back in the day, pre-social media, all of those types of things, and really just kind of fell in love with working with design, marketing, and technology all kind of combined. And that's really, why I started an agency around those things.
Love it.
But, again, I'm not a classically trained brand guy, so to speak, but I really wrote a book for marketers who are trying to understand, because I think, branding is falling more and more on, branding is falling more and more on marketers, and not only on marketers, but other employees within an organization. So, a true brand speaks, it's everybody's responsibility in the entire organization. So, trying to speak to marketers and others within an organization to show them this new idea of branding, and really this dynamic of the brand consumer relationship, which I think is continually evolving to be more and more equal. So I think, brands at first had all of the power of, when there's three products that in the world that do what someone needs, those three brands have a lot of power over consumers, because if you don't choose one of those three, you just don't get them, right?
Right,
so,
they've got the monopoly.
Exactly. So, as time goes on, there are, most definitely monopolies in the world, but there are so many more options. Consumers have more power over those brands because they have more options to choose, and they have more agency in and of themselves to choose and go elsewhere, and even make some of these things themselves. So that's that's some of what I don't want to spoil the new book or whatever, but that's some of the things that I'm exploring a lot more there, is just how that power dynamic shifts, and in the future, how that will continue to shift even more to, where consumers actually have a lot more power.
Love it. It's interesting, and it's clear that that's becoming more prevalent. As we all use our smartphones and we use various apps and we share our experiences, it becomes important to recognize that we do have more power as consumers. And then as marketers, if we don't listen to the power that's being wielded by our consumers, then we're really missing the boat and begging for disruption.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a few things that, kind of rules of agile branding I go over in the book. And, a big one is, to, first of all, listen to your customers, don't just broadcast at them. And I think, social media takes a lot of credit for that whole dynamic, but there's a lot of things going on, like I mentioned, the whole crowdfunding aspect of, brands like GE, for instance, have an entire division or company within them that are completely crowdfunded products. Like GE doesn't need money from consumers to start making products. They do that to get buy-in from customers and stuff like that. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And another principle that I go over is just how you need to stay true to your values, and no matter what. And I think there's some great examples of that recently. Nike, Starbucks, a few others have big brands that really don't need to take a stand on. Starbucks is still going to sell coffee whether they take a stand on social issues or not, but they choose to do that anyway because it is part of their values. And I think that goes a long way. It might alienate a few people, but they know who their core customers are and do that. And I think the third one is really to always remember that long-term customers are really the goal, and solving problems is the goal. Selling products is a byproduct of solving a real challenge that a customer has. And when companies really understand that, they have long-term customers.
Excellent. Well, I know you've been touring this around a little bit. What's been the most exciting part of this whole process for you?
Yeah, so I think it's my second book, but I got to say it's the first one that I've really tried promoting at a bigger level, and so I obviously I published the book, I self-published, and that was kind of an interesting process in and of itself. Was
it a thumbs up situation or a thumbs down?
Thumbs up. I mean, I would say the next one I'm self-publishing as well. Mm-hmm. I'll leave it to the fates, what I do with the fourth one, let's say. But yeah, no, I like it. I spoke with a lot of people that have done both ways, and pretty much everyone that I talked to said self-publishing is the way to go. There are certainly benefits to getting published, but
yeah, sorry, publishers.
Right. Well, call me, but right. The other interesting thing was just the promotional tour, and I hadn't done that before. I've done plenty of public speaking, but mm-hmm. It's often been around a very specific topic for each conference or event that I went to and spoke about, but this is the first time where I've really, gone and really kind of toured throughout the East Coast, and I'm gonna get back out in a few weeks and do some more of that this year. But it's been interesting, kind of giving the same talk to a variety of different audiences. Everything from college students to professional organizations to national conferences, and to kind of just see the reaction and the different types of questions that you get and all of that. And, that certainly taught me a lot about not only promoting a book, but really about the act of speaking. And I feel like I'm hopefully getting to be a better speaker because of, through practice and stuff like that. So that's been very interesting.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, there's a big difference, and you were great the first episode. It's so different interviewing somebody who has written a book, because you've thought through the concepts that you want to articulate so much more clearly that it makes a much bigger difference. Also, there's less of an inclination for somebody who's written a book to feel the need to self-promote, because hopefully the content does enough of that it provides enough value that it just works. And brings people through, and it's very articulate. So I tip my bonnet to you, good sir.
Thanks. No, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like, so I use writing as a way to teach myself sometimes too. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that the thing about people that have written books, because I felt even after I wrote the book, it really wasn't, and this probably sounds terrible, but it really wasn't until I had to explain the book to someone that I really kind of fully understood what I was trying to say. So, I wrote, I had a thesis statement and all that. I obviously worked all that stuff out, but it was really trying to come up with that 2 paragraphs of what am I going to put on Amazon.com to describe this book that really summarized the ideas. Because there's a couple hundred pages. There's a lot of thoughts there, even if they're cohesive and coherent. There's a lot of different thoughts kind of expressed in that on those pages. So it's and then being kind of forced to explain it in one sentence at a conference or in front of people, that makes it even more succinct and kind of that's been an interesting thing all in itself. So now, writing the 3rd book, I'm thinking of that from the start. Instead of kind of as an afterthought, it's maybe some of this is just book 101. But again, I'm not even a writer by training, so it's kind of interesting how life happens, I guess.
It is. Well, it sounds like a great growth experience, and you say you're not a writer, but I know you've been published in Forbes, and you've been published, you name it. He's been published in many, many different locations, different publications. So in terms of growth, since this is a show for marketing and for marketers, can you talk about the difference between touring versus not touring?
Sure. So I think having a book in general is a product to sell, and so it makes it so much easier to promote. And I think the interesting thing for me was, I owned an agency for, a little over a decade. And there was always this idea of, should I promote Carousel 30, my agency at the time, or should I promote Greg,
Right.
And as the owner, there was always this weird kind of pull of, well, I own this company, I really need to promote it. And, so I think the luxury that I have right now, and, the agency I work for, Yes And, are phenomenal about supporting me and allowing me to do this, is really, I have the benefit of being able to really work on a personal brand. And, so that in and of itself is interesting. I think having a book means that I have in this case, I have a physical thing that I can promote, but I have a thing and a product that I can promote, which makes it so much easier to say, okay, well, I want to come into town and speak with your audience, and I'm going to talk about this. And, instead of just saying, I want to talk about marketing, it's like, I want to talk about what's on these, 187 pages in this book. And, it's a lot more tangible to them. So it's a lot easier for someone to say yes or no, depending on if they like the book or not. But it's a lot easier for them to know what they're getting and stuff like that. So, from a promotional aspect, it makes it so much easier to do. It's not that, there's plenty of people that have phenomenal ideas, but unless you can help someone truly understand what those are, it's, I work with a lot of clients, clients always want to know what you're going to give them before they pay you to do it. Right. So that's right. The paradox of being a consultant, I think, is that. So in a sense, having a book is something where they can say, okay, well, I know what this is about because I can see it on these pages. So it's, yeah.
Love it. Yeah, that's great. I think in terms of marketing results, it sounds almost like the difference between just creating a product and then not doing anything versus creating a product and then creating campaigns around it that run regularly.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, I think about what would for my personal brand, it would be hard to keep just promoting myself without something without a kind of a proxy of like, this is why you should pay attention to this. So now, having that kind of thing, it's like, because I'm not selling consulting services for myself. I might sell, marketing services or things for Yes And, but for my own personal brand, there's not a service that I'm selling or anything like that. So it's really, it's something that I can talk about that, that people can get more value from, because I can't have conversations with literally everyone out there. So it's, it's just a way for me to offer something to other people.
Love it. Yeah. Better to have a billboard for something rather than just a billboard for Greg or for Carl with the thumbs up.
Right.
Come talk to us.
Right. Well, and I mean, yeah, that's why you doing this podcast, it's like, that is something that everyone can get something out of. And I mean, that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, which is it's solving a problem or solving a challenge. People have questions. People have questions about marketing. Marketers have questions about marketing all the time. And,
Absolutely.
Even if you work with a great team, when you work with a team all the time, you're going to get the same answers from them because you all have a shared experience. So, how do we, some of us network and join organizations and all of that is great. But sometimes, it's just nice to be able to read something, listen to something, all of that can, either answer some of the questions that or that you have questions about, or just give you new ideas that you never really thought of, or maybe put words to things that you've thought of but didn't really articulate yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We got to provide value. There's a David Ogilvy quote. I might mess it up a little bit, but it's something to the effect of advertising in its best form is insightful.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think we want to provide value. We want to be insightful. If we're not solving a problem, then there's not really any reason for us to be speaking. So I appreciate that. That's very helpful. Okay, so before we start to wrap up, do you have any favorite stories of Agile in play or not?
I mean, personally, not so much, but I mean, an example that I use in the book of a brand that I feel like has done a phenomenal job of staying agile is Netflix. And, so I go into depth in the book about it, but, really thinking about how many times has Netflix disrupted another industry, and a lot of companies, they get like one and then they kind of plateau and stuff like that. So, Netflix completely disrupted Blockbuster and the entire, video rental. I guess there's still the Redbox or whatever thing, but I haven't used DVDs in years. I don't even think about stuff like that personally. So, I've almost forgotten about. I think there's maybe one Blockbuster left in the world or something. But
right, and it's privately owned or something.
Right. So they did that.
Blockbuster, rest in peace.
Right. So they did that, but and a lot of companies would just like, okay, we nailed it. Like, let's just we'll make money off DVDs, mail order, all that stuff. But then they realized that, okay, well, the internet is a little like immature, but we're going to get into streaming and we're going to double down and invest in all of that. And sure enough, that is their business now. And then, didn't even sit on that and, started investing in original programming and are basically disrupting network television, cable television, all of those types of things. So, in a course of about 20 years, they've disrupted 3 times. And
Amazing.
Hopefully, for them, they will keep it up and continue to do that. But, I think it's a lesson in, it's not just enough that Uber disrupted once, but how are they going to continue to stay relevant? And if they don't, someone will disrupt them.
Right. Isn't that interesting? To come up with a full life cycle and continuous life cycle of disrupting.
Yeah.
That sets your imagination in motion. Very cool. Okay, so are there any things that you've said on tour that have really risen to the top that seem to resonate well with people?
I think the main thing is kind of what I was already saying of the main purpose of doing branding well is to make sure that you understand your customers' challenges and that you're solving those problems first. And, selling products is secondary, and it will happen if you prove your value first.
Outstanding. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Greg?
No. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Like that I'm on here second time and would love to come back.
Absolutely. Well, you got that third book coming, so that'll be a nice excuse. Well, fantastic. The last question that I want to make sure that I ask is where can people go to learn more about you and to reach you?
Sure. So I have a website, gregkihlstrom.com. There's a lot of consonants in my name, so it can sometimes be hard to spell. But search for the Agile Brand. The book's available on Amazon, iTunes, a lot of places. So pretty easy to find. But search the Agile Brand or Greg Kihlstrom, and yeah.
And as always, of course, we'll have you on the show notes page on spiralmarketing.com. So we'll have all those links there for everyone.
Great.
And perfect. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, I hope that you really enjoyed this episode of Spiral Marketing and that you will be a little bit more agile after today. Cheers.